History is full of fascinating and shocking stories that we never learned at school. As we grow older, we become more curious about the past and the secrets it hides. In this video, I present to you a selection of 20 terrible historical events and facts that were forbidden to talk about in the classroom. Enjoy watching. Number 20. The horrifying truth about pirates. You might think that pirates lived a glamorous and exciting life, sailing the seas in search of treasure and adventure. You might have seen movies like Pirates of the Caribbean, where the pirates are portrayed as heroic and charismatic characters, with lavish ships and plenty of food, drink, and fun. But the reality of piracy was far from the Hollywood fantasy. In fact, it was a brutal and miserable existence, plagued by disease, danger, and death. Pirates had to squeeze into small, old ships where they faced appalling hygiene conditions. They had to share their space with live animals, which spread infections and parasites. They had no proper toilets and had to use a hole at the front of the ship, called the head, to relieve themselves. Pirates also suffered from malnutrition and scurvy, a disease caused by lack of vitamin C. They had little access to fresh water, which would spoil quickly in wooden barrels. Their only alternative was rum, which they mixed with water to make it more palatable. But they did not drink rum for pleasure, but for necessity. And if that was not enough, pirates also faced constant peril. They could be killed or wounded in battles with other ships, or drowned in storms and shipwrecks. The life of a pirate was not a glamorous one, but a terrifying and tragic one. Number 19. The Bath School Disaster in Michigan. In 1927, a horrific tragedy struck the town of Bath, Michigan. A man named Andrew Kehoe, who had lost a bid for a treasury position, plotted a gruesome revenge. He was an electrical engineer and had suffered a head injury that may have affected his mental state. He secretly planted explosives in the basement of the local school and detonated them on May 18th, killing 38 children and 6 staff members. He also killed his wife, set fire to his farm, and blew up his car, killing himself and 4 others. The Bath School disaster was the deadliest act of mass murder in a school in U.S. history, and a shocking example of the devastating consequences of one man's rage and madness. Number 18. Bengal Famine of 1943. One of the most horrific and shocking events in the history of colonial India was the Bengal Famine of 1943, which wiped out an astounding 2 to 3 million lives in the span of a year. This was not a natural disaster caused by drought or pestilence, but a man-made calamity that resulted from the callous and reckless policies of the British government during World War II. Bengal was a fertile region that produced abundant rice crops, enough to feed its large population. But everything changed when the British Empire implemented a scorched earth policy to prevent a possible Japanese invasion. They confiscated and destroyed boats and bullocks, the main means of transporting food across the region. They also diverted food and resources to the war effort, leaving the local people to starve. Rice prices skyrocketed, and food became scarce and unaffordable. The British authorities ignored the plight of the Bengalis, who were dying by the thousands every day. They delayed and denied any effective relief measures, citing the war as their priority. It was only in late 1943 that they finally acknowledged the magnitude of the famine and took some steps to alleviate it. The Bengal Famine, a dark stain on the history of the British Empire, exposed the brutality of colonial oppression and the tragic human cost of war. Number 17. The myth about Napoleon's height. You probably believe that Napoleon Bonaparte, the legendary French ruler and conqueror, was a short man. This is one of the most enduring and popular myths about him, and it has shaped how he is depicted in movies and books. But where did this false impression come from? And how tall was Napoleon, really? The source of this myth lies in the misunderstanding between the French and the English measurements. In France, Napoleon's height was recorded in feet and inches, but these were different from the ones used in England. The French foot was a bit longer than the English foot, and the French inch was a bit longer than the English inch. So when Napoleon's height was measured after his death, it was 5'2" in 4 lines in French units, which is equal to 170 centimeters or 5'7" in today's units. But the English did not bother to adjust this number to their own units, and simply assumed that Napoleon was 5'2" in English units, which is equal to 157 centimeters or 5'2" in today's units. This blunder gave birth to the myth of the short Napoleon, and it was amplified by the propaganda and cartoons of the British, who wanted to ridicule and demean their foe. In truth, Napoleon's height was not remarkable for a French man of his era. According to historical data, the average height of a French soldier in the early 1800s was about 165 centimeters or 5'5" in today's units. Napoleon was actually taller than most of his peers, and he was surrounded by tall guards and officers, which might have made him appear smaller in contrast. The myth of the short Napoleon is a striking example of how history can be twisted by mistakes and prejudices. Number 16. The Partition of India and Pakistan. Imagine a colossal empire crumbling into two new nations, India and Pakistan, in the year 1947. This was not a peaceful or orderly transition. It was a devastating rupture along religious lines, unleashing a massive exodus of people. The operation was hasty and not well thought out, ignoring the intricate realities of coexistence. As the new borders emerged, terror swept the land. Hindus, Sikhs, and Muslims, anxious to avoid being trapped on the wrong side, rushed to cross the boundaries. The result was utter pandemonium. A terrifying wave of violence engulfed towns and villages, perpetrating heinous crimes. No one was safe, not even trains carrying frantic refugees. They were attacked, leaving behind a trail of blood. The cost was enormous. Between 200,000 and 2 million lives lost, and a staggering 14 million people were displaced. Number 15. The hidden ordeal of George Washington's teeth. George Washington is widely revered as the first and foremost president of the United States, a visionary leader who shaped the nation's destiny. His stately portrait adorns the currency and monuments of America, symbolizing its patriotic spirit. However, behind his dignified demeanor, there was a hidden and painful story that few people know, the story of his dreadful dental ordeal. Washington's dental woes began in his early adulthood, when he was only 20 years old. He suffered from a mysterious condition that caused his teeth to rot and fall out one by one. By the time he became president in 1789, he had only one tooth left in his mouth. He was well aware of the importance of his appearance, especially as the representative of a new nation. Therefore, he sought the help of Dr. John Greenwood, a renowned and innovative dentist of his time. Many people believe that Washington's dentures were made of wood, but this is a false and persistent myth. Wood would not last long in the moist environment of the mouth and would quickly decay and crack. The truth is that Greenwood made 4 sets of dentures for Washington using a variety of materials: hippo bones, elephant ivory, and even human teeth. He also used a gold plate to secure and support the dentures. Greenwood was a pioneer in using ivory for dental prosthetics, a material that was more durable and natural-looking than wood. These custom-made dentures allowed Washington to smile and speak with more confidence and eloquence in public. Today, you can see the replicas of Washington's dentures in some museums, like the National Museum of Dentistry in Baltimore and the New York Academy of Medicine. They are fascinating artifacts that connect us to the past and reveal a surprising aspect of the life of one of the most influential figures in American history. Number 14. The Dancing Plague. One of the most bizarre and terrifying epidemics in history was the Dancing Plague of 1518 in Strasbourg. It started when a woman named Madame Tropa began to dance wildly in the street. Soon, others joined her in a frenzy of non-stop dancing. Some collapsed from exhaustion but got up and danced again. Within a week, over 1,000 people were caught in the craze. The city authorities tried to cure the afflicted. Back then, medicine was based on dubious principles like treating the like with the like or draining blood. The officials set up a hall for the dancers, hired an orchestra, and brought in more patients. But this only worsened the situation. They then resorted to bloodletting, but to no avail. Finally, they shipped the dancers out of the city and isolated any new cases. This way, they ended the epidemic. But Strasbourg was not the only place to witness the dancing plague. Similar outbreaks occurred in the 14th century in France, in the 15th century in Belgium, and even in the 19th century in Madagascar. The cause of this disease is still a mystery. Some scientists think it was due to mass poisoning by ergot, a fungus that infects grains and has psychoactive effects. Number 13. How Fidel Castro outsmarted over 600 assassination attempts. Fidel Castro, the former leader of Cuba, was constantly in danger, facing a staggering number of over 600 plots to kill him. While the exact number may be disputed, there is no doubt that many attempts were made on Castro's life, ranging from secret operations by intelligence agencies to more overt and elaborate schemes. These plots took various shapes, from hidden traps to open attacks. Some involved poisoning his food, infecting his dive suit with a harmful fungus, sniper shots, and even trying to blow up his podium during a speech. One of the most notorious schemes occurred in 1960, just a year after Castro came to power, when the Central Intelligence Agency tried to assassinate him by lacing his favorite cigars with a lethal botulinum toxin. Despite being a fierce critic of capitalist systems and a strong supporter of socialist principles, Fidel Castro managed to escape these threats. His charismatic leadership, bold resistance of his enemies, and backing for his cause put him on the hit list of various countries and agencies. Yet Castro lived to the remarkable age of 90, dying peacefully from natural causes. Whether through rigorous security measures, loyal networks of allies, or simply a stroke of luck, Fidel Castro successfully evaded the tireless pursuit of foreign foes throughout his eventful life. Number 12. Shadow of Death. World War II was the most dreadful and momentous event in human history, not just because of the violence, but also because of the aftermath. As history records, the tide of the war turned after the U.S. Army unleashed atomic bombings on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Despite the disastrous aftermath, the local residents swiftly cleaned up the debris left by the bombs but faced a horrifying sight. This refers to the dark silhouettes of people and some objects vaporized in the blast, including children and their bikes, couples and their cars. This phenomenon was soon dubbed Shadows of the Dead. They serve as a stark reminder of the damage inflicted by the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Scientists explain that the shadows of Hiroshima are the result of the intense light radiation during the nuclear explosion. The phenomenon resembles the formation of a normal shadow. An object blocks the surface behind it from the radiation. In an atomic explosion, the radiation is so powerful that many surfaces alter their color and properties. Unshielded people in the range of the light radiation suffered burns up to charring, leaving unscathed shadows. Some of them lived but perished later from the wounds and burns. Almost 80 years have elapsed since the explosion, but some shadows still remain, warning us of the terrible consequences brought by the war. Number 11. The amazing legacy of aqueducts. Aqueducts, or water channels, were a remarkable achievement of ancient Rome. They enabled the city to have a reliable water supply and sewage system. The first aqueduct was built in 312 BC, and soon more followed. Most of the channels were underground, but sometimes they had to cross valleys and gorges. To overcome this challenge, ancient Roman engineers built impressive structures above the ground. These were arch bridges. They stacked the arches in tiers to make them more stable. Some of these bridges still stand and function today. The most famous one, the Pont de Garde, is in France. Ancient Romans used various materials to build aqueducts, such as stone, brick, volcanic rocks, and concrete. They planned and executed their construction with great precision and skill. They always made sure that the aqueducts had a slight slope, so that the water would flow naturally. To do this, they used many instruments, such as levels, angle meters, odometers, and others. Archaeological excavations have revealed how the Romans installed the pipes. They first laid a stone base, then placed the pipes on top. The pipes had a U-shape and were big enough for a person to enter for repairs. They covered the pipes with an arch-shaped roof to protect them from dust and dirt. They also plastered them in wet areas and used a drainage system to remove groundwater. Ancient Roman aqueducts are incredibly complex structures. Despite being over 2,300 years old, many of them are still intact and useful today. Number 10. The history of ketchup. What do you think of when you hear the word ketchup? You probably think of a tomato-based sauce that originated in the United States. But this is far from the truth. The history of ketchup is a surprising and complex one, involving different cultures, ingredients, and adaptations. The original version of ketchup was not a tomato-based sauce, but a Chinese concoction of fermented fish and spices called ketchup. The name ketchup comes from this Hokkien Chinese word, meaning fish sauce. This sauce was discovered by British explorers in the 18th century, who brought the idea back to Britain. There, they experimented with various ingredients to create their own versions of ketchup. Some of the ingredients they used were mushrooms, walnuts, oysters, anchovies, and even kidney beans. Tomatoes were not introduced until the early 19th century, when American cooks decided to make a cheaper and sweeter ketchup. The first recipe for tomato ketchup was published in 1812 by a scientist named James Mees. He called it love apple ketchup, as tomatoes were also known as love apples back then. The ketchup we know today was popularized by Henry J. Heinz, who started selling his bottled ketchup in 1876. He added vinegar and sugar to preserve the ketchup and give it a unique flavor. This fascinating culinary history reveals how ketchup transformed over time and across cultures. Number 9. The misunderstood symbolism of the Statue of Liberty. The Statue of Liberty is a majestic and inspiring symbol of freedom and liberty, towering over the harbor and welcoming visitors from around the world. Many people associate the statue with immigration, as it is located near Ellis Island, where millions of immigrants entered the United States in search of a better life. However, the statue's original meaning and purpose reveal a different story. The Statue of Liberty was actually designed to represent the spirit of enlightenment, a philosophical and intellectual movement that emphasized reason, science, and human rights. The statue holds a torch that signifies the light of knowledge and a tablet that bears the date of the Declaration of Independence, the founding document of the United States. The statue was a generous and meaningful gift from France to the United States, celebrating the 100th anniversary of American independence and strengthening the bond between the two allies. The link between the statue and immigration became stronger when Emma Lazarus wrote The New Colossus, a moving and powerful poem that was engraved on the statue's pedestal. In her words, the statue became the compassionate and protective mother of exiles, inviting the poor, the tired, and the huddled masses to her shores. This poem added a new dimension to the statue's symbolism, making it more inclusive and universal. This exploration into the statue's history reminds us that our understanding of history can be influenced by false or incomplete information. It encourages us to examine historical narratives with a critical and curious eye, recognizing their complexity and diversity. Number 8. Cleopatra's true roots. Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of ancient Egypt, is often portrayed as a stunning Egyptian queen. But this image is far from the truth. Her ancestry was not Egyptian, but Macedonian Greek. She descended from Ptolemy, one of Alexander the Great's generals, who became the king of Egypt after Alexander's death. What makes Cleopatra so fascinating is her unconventional sense of identity. Unlike her predecessors, she embraced Egyptian culture. She was the first ruler to learn the Egyptian language. She also blended her Greek heritage with the Egyptian customs, creating a complex and captivating persona. Cleopatra's charm lies in her skillful crossing of cultural boundaries, mixing Greek and Egyptian elements. She showed that cultural identity is not fixed, but flexible and diverse. She also proved that a foreign ruler could become part of the Egyptian legacy, leaving a lasting impression on history. Number 7. Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus is famous as one of the greatest explorers in history. However, he also made a huge blunder in his calculations, leading him to discover a whole new continent by accident. When Columbus set out to find the wealthy land of India, he was a seasoned sailor who had traveled to Africa, England, Iceland, and Ireland. He thought that since the Earth is round, he could reach Asia by sailing west, but he did not know that the Earth was much bigger than he imagined. On August 3, 1492, he embarked on his quest for Asia. He was accompanied by 90 people who sailed on 3 ships, Pinta, Nina, and Santa Maria. Columbus headed west, sure that he would find what he was looking for, but he was in for a shock. Instead of reaching India, he landed in the Bahamas and Haiti, and he wrongly assumed that this was India. He named the local people Indians. Ironically, this is how the native people of America came to be called Indians. In his later voyages, he still searched for India, but he only found more parts of Central and South America. It would have made sense to name America Columbia, but he never realized that he had found a new continent. It was only between 1497 and 1502 that the Italian explorer Amerigo Vespucci recognized America as a separate continent and put it on the maps. Number 6. The Trail of Tears. One of the most horrific events in American history took place in the early 1800s, under the presidency of Andrew Jackson. It was the massive and violent displacement of Native American nations from their ancestral homes in the Southeast to the lands west of the Mississippi River. This atrocious episode, known as the Trail of Tears, left a permanent scar on the Native American people and their culture. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 authorized the government to seize the lands of Native Americans in the eastern cotton-growing regions and swap them for lands in the west, called the Indian Colonization Zone. But this was not a fair trade. It was a cruel and unlawful operation executed by the U.S. military. The Cherokee, Muskogee, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole nations were among the ones who suffered the forced removal from their territories. Over 60,000 Native Americans trekked for thousands of miles, struggling with harsh conditions and inadequate supplies. This ordeal caused widespread disease, starvation, and death, with an estimated 4,000 of the relocated Cherokee people perishing. The consequences of these forced relocations were devastating. Native American nations not only mourned the loss of their people, but also grieved the loss of their ancestral lands and their way of life. Number 5. From failed experiments to kitchen marvels. The microwave is a familiar sight in most American kitchens, but did you know the astonishing origin story? This seemingly mundane appliance, now a household staple, was the result of an accidental discovery. Imagine this. Over 70 years ago, an American engineer named Percy Spencer, working on a radar project for Raytheon, made a stunning observation. As he worked on an active magnetron, a vacuum tube that produces microwaves, he felt something odd. His candy bar in his pocket had liquefied. This bizarre phenomenon sparked his interest, leading him to conduct further experiments. The outcome was a monumental accidental invention. In 1947, Percy Spencer and his team introduced the first commercially available microwave oven, called the Radarange. Using the power of microwaves, this innovative device rapidly heated food by vibrating water molecules inside. However, it was not accessible to everyone, as it was massive and expensive, weighing around 750 pounds. Today, the microwave has evolved into a sleek and affordable marvel. Number 4. Library of Alexandria and the Loss of Knowledge. In the year 295 BC, Egypt witnessed the birth of a wondrous place in Alexandria, thanks to the vision of Ptolemy II. It was not just any place. It was an innovative research institute, a forerunner of what we might call a think tank today. Ptolemy II, eager to attract the geniuses of the time, consulted his advisor Demetrius of Phalerum on how to lure in eminent thinkers. Demetrius had a stunning idea: collect books from all over the world. Ptolemy II executed this plan, and it was a huge success. Great minds like Plato and Xenodotus of Ephesus flocked to Alexandria, and Xenodotus became the first librarian, initiating an amazing collection of about 5,000 unique books. The library kept growing its collection as ships entering Alexandria were rigorously searched for manuscripts. Seized works were stored in the library, making it the biggest in the world at that time, containing roughly 1 million manuscripts. The library preserved works from Greek, Jewish, Egyptian, and Babylonian thinkers, and groundbreaking scientific discoveries were made within its walls. Laboratories and even a medical school were part of this intellectual paradise. Sadly, this magnificent institution met its end in 48 to 47 BC due to a fire during a clash between Cleopatra and her brother. Efforts were made to restore it, but the library's splendor vanished as Alexandria became a Roman province. Number 3. The Spanish flu killed 1/3 of the population. The Spanish flu of 1918 was one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. It infected about 500 million people, which was around 1/3 of the world's population at the time, and caused 50 million deaths. To put this in perspective, the First World War, which ended in the same year, had a death toll of around 18 million. The Spanish flu was caused by a virus that mutated and became highly contagious and lethal. It was a random and unstoppable force of nature that could wipe out millions of lives in a matter of months. This is a terrifying thought, as it shows how a virus can change the course of history and challenge the survival of humanity. Number 2. The U.S. government withheld syphilis treatment for decades. One of the most shameful and unethical experiments in American history was conducted by an organization supported by the U.S. government. It involved deliberately denying syphilis treatments to hundreds of black men for 4 decades, even though a cure was easily accessible. The purpose was to study how the disease would affect their bodies and minds without their informed consent. The experiment, known as the Tuskegee Syphilis Study, started in 1932 and lasted until 1972, when it was exposed by a whistleblower. By then, many of the men had died, suffered, or infected their partners and children. The study was a gross violation of human rights and medical ethics, and a tragic example of racial discrimination and injustice. Number 1. Witch trials in Europe. A terrifying phenomenon swept across Europe from the 15th to the 18th century. It was a ruthless campaign known as the Great Hunt. This campaign was not about hunting animals, but about killing something deemed far more evil: witches. Pushed by a dangerous mix of fear, superstition, and religious passion, this time, also called the Burning Times, saw an era marked by witch trials. In this sad part, about 40,000 to 60,000 people died because of the madness, most of them women. Witchcraft accusations, often made with weak or fake proof, became a way to hurt and silence those who did not follow the rules or threaten the existing power structure. The way to conviction was full of torture, making people say things that were not true, like having evil deals and doing bad magic. The accused, mostly women, faced horrible deaths, burned alive, hanged, or drowned. The witch trials showed a Europe stuck in deep fear and hatred of women, showing the awful results of wild social panic, unfair justice, and the terrible fall into group madness. Thanks for watching, fam. For a more unbelievable video, click now on the next video that pops up on your screen.